Welcome to Swiftuality, where we meet at the intersection of Taylor Swift and spirituality.
We're your hosts. I'm Megan.
And I'm Hannah. Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. Today it's another guest episode. Megan, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes. So our guest today is Shannon. I'm so excited to have her. And Shannon is one of my good friends, but we have only known each other for just a few months at this point, which is pretty crazy. Shannon is another chaplain that we met through work one night pretty randomly. And we just Shannon immediately knew that I was a Swiftie somehow. I'm not really sure how, but say hello, Shannon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon.
Yes, that's Shannon. So we met crossing over shifts.
Yeah.
I think I was coming on day shift and you had worked the night or something.
Yeah.
And you're both chaplains at the same.
And we're both chaplains. Yep. Mm-hmm. And we're both doing on-call work. And so we hadn't met each other before. And for some reason, you were just like... Actually, we'll get into the story later because this is a big part of what we're going to talk about.
Story.
This is an important story that's going to lead into the rest of the episode, so we'll save it. But anyway, I'll just read a little bit about Shannon. Shannon is a hospice chaplain from Oregon with a Bachelor of Science in Human Development, a Master of Arts in Theology, and a Master of Divinity. She's very smart. She has advanced specialty training in mental health chaplaincy, which she pursued to understand more about how spirituality can improve mental health. She is passionate about beauty, art, and human connection, how those can help people make meaning out of their suffering. Naturally, she is a Swiftie who appreciates Taylor Swift's exploration of difficult topics, including mental health, death and dying, grief, and loss. And a fun fact, she actually used Taylor Swift lyrics in her preaching class in seminary as her sacred text rather than using traditional scriptures from organized religions, which
We're
is
here for it.
Just so amazing. So welcome, Shannon.
Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you.
So obviously, you also love Taylor Swift and find such meaning in her lyrics. How did you become a Swiftie, Shannon? What was the beginning? What started it? All of it.
So I've been a Swiftie since debut.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't call myself that back then. I don't think that term has been around since then. But I remember like listening to Tim McGraw, like her first single on the radio. So I grew up in like rural Oregon. So a lot of country music. I grew up religious, which we'll get into later. So it was like pretty much only country music and Christian music. So I heard Taylor Swift on the radio and was like, oh, she feels special to me. I also listened to like Carrie Underwood and like Kelly Pickler and it was, or Pickler. Okay, yeah. Kelly Pickler from American Idol. And I know Taylor Swift actually wrote one of her songs.
I was going to say,
yeah. So like I listened to a lot of the like younger teenage country stars, but Taylor Swift felt special to me. I think because she was younger. And just obviously the content of what she wrote about. So I actually have this like distinct memory. I grew up, you know, this was like early 2000s, like burning CDs was the thing. And my sister had a bunch of music that I wanted to like burn CDs of. And she wouldn't let me. And she was like gatekeeping for no reason other than being an older sister. Yeah. And I like told my dad about it and how it like hurt my feelings and I wanted to listen to music. And he was like, well, let's go to the store and we can pick out some music for you, which was like so sweet. And I remember I got like an Ally and AJ CD, if you guys remember them.
Of course.
And Debut from Taylor Swift. I'm pretty sure. Those were the two. And I listened to Debut like over and over and over again. And I had like the first version, the lyrics from Picture to Burn where like she says, I'll tell my friends you're gay or whatever.
Do you still have it?
I don't think so. I know it'd be like worth something now. But sure. Yeah. So I just listened to that song or that album on repeat. I knew all the words. I had like dances made up to some of the songs. And I just resonated so much with the feeling of being a teenage girl who felt out of place.
How old were you? Do you remember?
Debut came out in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have been 12.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
So I wasn't quite a teenager yet, but I was, definitely coming of age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could just tell that she knew what it felt like to be an awkward teenage girl. And I also really struggled with depression. So her song, Tied Together with a Smile, was very comforting to me because it felt like she knew what it felt like to have to pretend. Her debut album is just very special to me, and I cannot wait for debut Taylor's version.
It's going to be so amazing.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
It's going to be incredible.
So,
did you know that it was depression at that age, or you just...
No, not at all. It was just something that wasn't talked about in my Christian culture. And if it was referred to as a mood, not a mental illness. And it was because you were doing something wrong or not trying or disconnected from God or something like that. So yeah, I didn't have the word for it back then, but I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what that was.
I feel like people didn't realize too that kids can be depressed. Like I don't, or like have anxiety as a diagnosis and like a state instead of feeling anxious or just feeling sad,
Right. Like it's not just you're being moody. It's like you actually need medication or therapy or some extra support.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she really did help me through that. And looking back now as a 30-year-old, I can just have so much compassion on teenage me, 12-year-old me. And a lot of Taylor Swift lyrics kind of helped me understand what I was going through, especially in debut.
That's great. Like, I actually got into debut after Fearless because, like, Fearless was, like, my gateway. But for you, after debut, did you, like, keep listening to Taylor, or that was, like, just a phase?
I did, but not in the same way. Like, I don't think I had a physical copy of Fearless. I, like, heard the singles on the radio. I, like, watched the music videos on YouTube and stuff like that. But I was kind of starting my internalized misogyny phase.
Oh,
Classic.
I know. But I did listen through like Fearless and Speak Now, but I really had a hard time with Red because I just didn't connect with the singles.
We're singles.
I know. I'm like, where was All Too Well?
I know.
right.
At least we have it now. 10 minutes of it.
Yep.
But yeah, I just didn't like the Red singles. It felt like she wasn't making country music anymore, which she kind of like was moving away from that, which was her right to do. But I was still just so attached to that like version of her that helped me through like being a 12-year-old. And I was kind of starting this like internalized misogyny thing. And so I kind of moved away from her after that for quite a few years.
Do you feel like the internalized misogyny, kind of like what thoughts do you remember having, or I don't know, what kind of do you think influenced that?
Well, I think it was just not, there was just a time when it wasn't cool to like Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like that affected me. And I think there's also a lot of internalized misogyny, well, not internalized misogyny, but just misogyny in Christianity, which was my culture at the time. And so just kind of being in that environment where like female musicians weren't as celebrated and liking girly things wasn't cool. When I hit like 14, 15, I kind of went through a phase where I was like pretending to like metal because that was just like my little rebellion. And I always had to pretend. I never liked it. Like,
Oh my gosh.
when I was by myself, I would listen to like acoustic versions of the songs.
Oh my gosh.
So it was just like, I just wanted to fit in, basically, which is like very much a
love
theme of
that.
debut too. But I wanted to fit in.
Yeah. I was going between Avril Lavigne and Taylor Swift. Just,
Yeah.
like, back to back.
Which like there's a connection there. I will argue that. Yeah.
100%.
Even metal too. I don't know.
I mean, it's all about feelings,
It's true. It's very true.
just different feelings.
Yeah.
Expressing them in different ways.
I feel like it's like freeing like both of them, right? Like Taylor addressing like all the feelings, and like it feels liberating that like, oh, these are the feelings that like I struggle to name. And then there's Avril, who's just like screaming and just saying stuff that you're not supposed to, you know, and like just
Yeah.
I think that's fun.
What a good time in music. But Shannon, you did eventually get back into Taylor, right?
I did. Obviously, as I'm sitting here on the Taylor Swift podcast. Yes, obviously I did. But I really got back into her when Folklore came out.
Ooh.
I had heard the singles from, 1989 and Reputation and Lover, and was like, oh, these are fun. But I didn't get kind of like back into my identity as someone who really loved Taylor Swift until Folklore. I think that's kind of the story for a lot of people, because that's just such it just, I don't know, it feels like a love letter to her old fans with the country themes, but like grown up country themes. Like it's
Her country background really shines through in her songwriting, I think, the storytelling.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, so good.
Yes. And when I heard Betty for the first time, my soul like left my body, because I was like, this sounds like it would have been on like Debut or Fearless or something.
Yeah.
It's still one of my very favorites. I'm so glad that she included it in the Eras tour set. But yeah, and then after that, I went back and like listened to her whole discography that I had missed out on, and I really grew to love her other sounds other than country too. Ironically, I think I probably listen to her pop music more now. Controversial opinion, but Lover is actually like my most listened to Taylor Swift album.
We get it.
Let's
We
go.
get it.
We're lovers, Dan.
Yeah, we are.
Yes. Yeah, so good. But I love them all. And as a hospice chaplain, I drive around a lot, because I drive around to people's homes and do my spiritual care work in their homes. So 90% of the time while I'm driving in between visits, I am listening to Taylor Swift. And her music literally gives me the spiritual energy to do my work, to sit and talk to people who are dying, which I feel like that's kind of a big deal.
Okay. So I also am working hospice right now, and sometimes it's hard for me. I don't know if you have like a certain playlist of songs you listen to while you're driving, but for me, sometimes it's really hard to listen to something really poppy and amped up and then have to remind myself, oh, I'm going into the home of someone who's dying. Like that transition is sometimes hard for me. So how do you navigate that? Looking for advice.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just really too good at compartmentalizing, but I don't know.
That's
I
fair.
just feel like having kind of an upbeat song helps me like release. Going and seeing someone have their last breath, and then going and driving and listening to me. I don't know. That doesn't feel like it contradicts to me.
Yeah.
It just feels like those are two parts of life.
For sure.
I get that.
Yeah. I think it helps me let go.
Yeah, I feel like it helps me like separate, myself from like the grief. Like this is like not my life, it's my job, but like just kind of, I don't know.
Right. Or
Yeah.
I find that it helps me to carry the fullness of life, of like, yes, there is this really sad part of life. And then also there's Taylor Swift's
Nice
music,
meeting.
what's just celebrating different parts of life.
I also definitely sometimes like need to listen to a sad song.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just listening to upbeat music after like witnessing death. Like sometimes sometimes I need a sad song too.
You got to feel that out in a different way through a different
Yeah.
song.
Recently,
Yeah.
I've been listening to How Did It End on repeat just to make myself cry.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Probably not. I don't know. I'm like, sometimes you feel like I need to like
Release.
get out some tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. That is a great song
It
to do
does
that.
something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The line about the death rattle.
Oh my gosh.
As someone who
100%.
hears the death rattle all the
100%.
time,
Too real.
it makes that feel so real.
Goosebumps.
Should we explain the death rattle to listeners?
Sure. Go for it.
So I've actually seen some people on TikTok who don't know what the death rattle is, and they like don't understand that lyric. So I feel like we should talk about it.
For sure.
Yeah. I don't think I know what that is, but
Okay.
like I feel like I could like imagine what it could be, but I would love to hear.
I don't think I can explain like the medical.
I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah.
And you can jump in.
Please do.
So, how I like to think of it is that One time, a palliative care doctor in hospice told me our bodies know how to die. And if we let them go through that process, they know how to die. They're going to be able to do it. And so I kind of think of it like labor too, where it's this thing your body does to get a baby out. And it's kind of the same thing with dying. Like there's different things your body does as it shuts down. And so there's kind of different stages of dying. And if you've known someone who's died and you've been around them towards the end, you'll notice they'll be talking and then eventually they're sleeping a lot more, and then they become unresponsive where they're not able to be woken up. And then towards the end, which is when we say someone is actively dying, is they're usually totally unresponsive, and you start to notice things like their mouth might hang open and they're breathing exclusively through their mouth. And they kind of, we call it posturing, where their like chin kind of comes up. And sometimes, depending on the person, and it just like birth, every birth is different, every death is different, everyone's body does it a little bit different. But some people will have what's called the death rattle, where I think it's basically just mucus in their lungs that basically when they're taking those like very concentrated heavy breaths, it kind of makes, it's not necessarily like a rattling sound. It very much sounds like someone.
It's like wheezing.
It's like kind of like wheezing. Yeah, but it's a little bubblier.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Dang.
I think that's a great explanation.
Great.
Yeah. And I've heard this too, that like families get concerned, like, oh, does this mean that they're in pain? Does this mean that they can't breathe, that it's uncomfortable? Usually they're on so much medication, if we're doing our jobs right, that we don't have to worry about that.
It is like labor in the way that it's hard work, I think.
Yes. Yeah, it's a journey that person is on. And I've heard from people that, and I think I probably felt this way at first, but I'm so used to it now that it's kind of haunting to hear, because it's like, it means that death is right around the corner. You know, usually we say hours to days at that point. And so, you know, the death rattle breathing, that line in that song, like when you've heard it, it just makes it so visceral.
Yeah, and I think it usually frightens people who have not heard it. Like if you haven't heard it before and you see your loved one start doing that, you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? But yeah, there's ways to help those secretions like lessen, but it's usually, we can tell when people are in pain usually. Like there's very clear ways that like their brow is furrowed, or when you move them, they like wince and things like that. And the other fun fact I will share that the same palliative doctor shared with me was that dying is not always painful. You wonder if it would be painful if you see it, and it just depends on what the person is dying from. Sometimes it can be painful if, you know, they're dying from a certain type of cancer, but it's not always. So
Yeah, and like another thing that is hard for people sometimes is like people want to stop eating, they want to stop drinking, and people are like, they want to show their love through like nourishing their loved one. And we have to like explain, like, actually the more loving thing to do is to just let them refuse food and refuse water, because that's what they need to do to like pass on to
their
the next
body
place they're
knows
going.
how to die.
Exactly.
And it can actually cause more harm if you do try to get them to eat. Like that can be painful.
Yeah. So it really is kind of this process of like accepting what's happening, which I feel like, how did it end? She doesn't quite know how it ended, but she knows that it did.
Which is, if you're not around death a lot, you're just like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, like there are all these signs of life still.
So thanks for letting us get on our chaplain soapbox and
Yeah, I loved
talk
it.
to people about dying.
A lot of being a hospice chaplain is not just being there like when the death rattle is happening, though. Like, you know, to get on hospice, you have to have a prognosis of 6 months or less. But a lot of people live longer than that on hospice. Like I've had patients who've been on service for years. And so all that to say, people, when they're in that dying process, even if they're not like actively dying, they have a lot they want to talk about. Sometimes, some people don't, but they have painful feelings, and having a chaplain there gives them a chance to like say it out loud, get it off their chest, process what they want to process before they die. And I think it's pretty magical that we get to do that. And I see so much relief and catharsis people feel when they are seen and understood and heard. And in my line of work, it can literally be the difference between someone having a peaceful or a tumultuous death if they get to like say what they need to say.
Totally.
And what's interesting is sometimes like people have things that they need to say, but they can't really talk much anymore. So then we have to kind of like investigate and figure out what they want to say for them. Like, oh, are you worried about like a regret, or are you worried about your family? Or like we kind of get to do like an investigation to help them get to the root of what they're trying to say, and then give them the words for it.
Yeah. You know, everyone is different. And so sometimes they don't have anything that they
Absolutely
need to get off their chest or regrets in that way. And then it's also interesting at what point people do, like that shows up, you know, and it's really special to be able to catch those moments.
It really makes me think about Taylor Swift's music, how she gives us sometimes the words to say the things that we don't know how to say, which is such a gift.
Yeah, and I feel like my experience with death and dying is like people want to tell stories, like you said, but I remember being in the hospital room with my husband's grandma, and she actually had a pretty peaceful death, and just like days of like calling in family to come say goodbye, and then all she wanted to do is just telling stories about when my husband was a kid, and you know, a story she said, she was like, I have a secret. And it was from Aaron was a kid, and he hated eating salad, and his grandparents live in their basement, so he went down to grandma and was like, Grandma, I have a secret, please don't tell anybody, but I hate salad. And she was like, apparently she kept that, you know.
Aww.
And so now, and she's just like, well, I have to tell everybody now, and like as like it's a joke, you
That's
know,
hilarious.
like she's just wanting to revisit memories. So she was able to do that with everyone in the room. Like, here's a little
That's so special.
story and memories I have of you. So I think, yeah, that's so cool. And then like we live on with stories of those people. So
I think storytelling is such a way to process grief too. I remember when I was doing my chaplaincy training, that was something that like they encouraged us to do when someone was grieving, to like ask questions
Ask about a story, yeah.
to like help them tell a story, because you know, grief is love where you don't know where to put it anymore because the person's gone or the situation's gone. And so you get to put it into a story and share it with someone else, and it's like so beautiful to be a part of that.
Yeah.
I think it too is a good way to get the feeling across of like, this is why this, or this is what this person meant to me. This is why I love them so much, because of how they behaved in the story, how they were a cornerstone of my memories and my story, you know, how we all interweave into each other's lives. And
Yeah. And I don't know how true this is, but I heard somewhere that when you experience a near-death experience and people say like you see your life flash before your eyes, that's like your body going through all of the experience and scenario, like trying to figure out what they need to do in that situation to like stay alive. And that's what's happening. You're just seeing like
that's crazy.
your life flash before
Yeah.
you. But that's why, like, it's like a survival instinct.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Crazy. I don't know if it's true.
I also know, I can't remember the name of it, but like the same like chemical release that happens when you do DMT like gets released in your brain when you die. So it's this like supposedly this like really euphoric experience.
Whoa. What's a DMT?
It's like a drug. Yeah, like a psychedelic, yeah. I think
psychedelic. Cool.
But yeah, people like take it and have experiences of like ascending to heaven and like meeting God. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I do not have personal experience. Let me just be clear on that.
I've always been so curious, but I'm too scared to.
Me too.
Yeah, same.
So kind of like back to talking about the power of stories.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about drugs another time. But it really makes me think about a theme in Taylor Swift's music about speaking about our pain, like telling our stories. Actually, one of the sermons I preached in seminary was on the song Dear John. And my like point was tell your story. Even if it hurts the person who hurt you, like you have a divine right to speak your truth, to tell your story.
Wow.
And like obviously John Mayer was a little embarrassed when this song came out, but he shouldn't have dated a 19-year-old if he didn't want to feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I love this quote from Anne Lamott, which I kind of feel like encapsulates this concept. You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better. And obviously this is like a different kind of sacred storytelling. Like it's not about like processing someone's death, but I do think this was a way for her to process her grief, was to like tell the story of how she felt afraid that the floor was going to fall through and how she never felt like she could win his game. And then she like took the power back. And I just think it's so beautiful. And I also think she gave words to a lot of teenage girls who dated who were pursued by adult men. Let me not put it on the teenage girls, to like give us words to be like, oh yeah, that was kind of fucked up. And I just feel like that's another one of the gifts that she offers, is like kind of connected to that same theme of giving people words to tell their stories that they might not have come up with on their own, but that they still really needed to say.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's not just like about a relationship. I feel like it applies to so many situations where you're like made to feel dumb, where you're, you know, like made to feel less than and not good enough and all of that.
Yeah, like anytime there's a power,
A power difference.
yeah, power difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's calling accountability to those authorities.
Yeah. And I just love that Taylor has continued to do that throughout her career.
And I love that she's like, as of Midnights, was still a little pissed about this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, let's take it back to the past. I still
Yeah.
have some things
Yeah.
to process.
Yeah, I
more
love
to
it.
say. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, and like it just gives us almost permission to be like, actually, you can let it out. You know, what's past in the past, but also if you still need to process it, let it out. It's not too late.
Yeah.
And her whole career, people have been telling her to not.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep talking about what hurts.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to listen, don't listen.
And look at her now.
Yeah.
I know.
Look at her now.
Clearly, it resonates with people.
Yeah. So here's just another question that we have for you.
Oh, okay.
As a hospice chaplain, just a chaplain in general, how has your view of death evolved? Maybe over your lifetime? Where are you now? What's changed?
Yeah, so we're kind of talking about telling stories even if they hurt. So this is kind of connected to that. But as I mentioned earlier, I did struggle with depression as a kid. Another thing I struggled with, and I don't know if this was a symptom of my depression or some other thing, but I had intrusive thoughts. And intrusive thoughts are not just like little quirky thoughts like, oh, I think I want to cut bangs. It's usually actually like really violent or sexual or blasphemous. It's like you can't help but think the opposite of what you actually think. Like if you actually love someone and want to protect them, you might have an intrusive thought that's like the opposite of that, basically. And it's really awful.
Yeah.
And I know more people are talking about these things now. I've heard Anna Kendrick talk about this. I've heard Jeanette McCurdy talk about this. So I think it's like becoming a little bit more known. I've also seen a lot of TikToks about it. But it's a thing that a lot of people deal with. And that was something that I dealt with when I was a kid. And I don't so much anymore, just because my understanding of thoughts have changed. Like I don't really attach to thoughts anymore in the same way. So if something kind of strange pops into my head, I'm just like, oh, okay, thanks, you can go now. But I didn't have the skills to do that when I was a kid. And growing up Christian, a lot of times my intrusive thoughts were centered around like hating God or not believing in God, because I wanted so bad to believe in God. I wanted so bad to love God. So I'd have the thoughts that were the opposite. And because of that, I didn't know what intrusive thought was. I just thought it was like evil or possessed by a demon. And I thought that I was going to go to hell because of that. So that meant that death wasn't just death. Death was damnation. And the hell that I grew up hearing about was not like, oh, it's just darkness, or, oh, you're just separated from God. It was like, you're literally burning alive forever, which is
in fire.
In fire.
Yeah.
Or a lake of fire. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I still don't understand how someone could in good conscience teach a child that. But that's a conversation for another time. But because of that, again, death never was just death. It was this whole other thing. I had an uncle die when I was a kid. He was like fairly young. He was in his 40s, and he was not a Christian. And when he died, I wasn't just allowed to feel sad that he died. I was afraid that he was in hell. And I was feeling guilty that I didn't do more to try to get him to be a Christian so that he didn't go to hell. And I was like 7. So that's just like an insane amount of pressure for a kid. Just too much.
Absolutely.
But I did eventually get over my fear of hell when I finished my first master's degree. When I was 25, I wrote my thesis on universal salvation. I think I did it to convince myself more than anything, but I used ancient Christian theology, like from early church councils and the Bible and oral traditions of the ancient church. And I really like investigated what the Christian church at its roots actually taught about like heaven and hell, and like the modern version of hell that we believe in now. Well, I don't believe in, but that is still taught is actually based on like Dante's Inferno, not like the Bible.
Yeah. Not what ancient people believed.
Right.
Yeah. No.
For people who don't know, tell us what universal salvation means.
Oh, yeah. So for those who don't know, universal salvation is the belief that like everyone goes to heaven, basically, or and maybe not even the word heaven, but like nobody goes to hell.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different traditions that have like their own version of this. I think probably the most well-known would be Unitarian Universalists, but it's kind of this belief that like every religion, every spiritual belief kind of all leads to the same place in the end. And that place is like the divine or God. That's the best way I can explain it right now. Would you?
Yeah, there's also specifically Christian universalism that kind of says, oh, Jesus' sacrifice, if you want to use that terminology, saved everyone. Like, you don't have to say the prayer to accept Jesus into your heart. Like, Jesus just was covered it all.
Yeah, and I think, like, to use some theological terms, that would be, like, inclusivist, universal salvation, where it's, like, even if you don't follow Jesus, Jesus still saved you. And then there's, like, pluralist universalism, where it's, like, you could follow Muhammad or Buddha or, like, whoever, and their path will get you to the divine. And it's a different path than Jesus, but it's just as valid of a path. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great.
And then there's a fun third option, which is the one I grew up with, which is called exclusivism, which is exactly what it sounds like. Where no one goes to heaven unless they ask Jesus into their heart.
Yeah. So that's the opposite of universalism.
Yes. So basically, I had to prove to myself through writing a 50-page thesis that I didn't have to be afraid of going to hell anymore. And then I kind of realized that was the only thing keeping me a Christian, was like the fear of what would happen to me if I wasn't. So it helped me actually let go of Christianity. I had to prove to myself that I wasn't going to be punished, and I was able to let it go. And because of that, I was able to kind of actually confront what death is as just what it is, as not this eternal fate that you have to live with based on the decisions you made in a very short life.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And interestingly enough, even though I like spent my thesis proving that everyone goes to heaven, I don't really believe in heaven anymore either. At least not in the like life after death way. I think we all have moments of heaven and we all have moments of hell. But I don't think it's this like thing that happens after we die.
Yeah.
I do believe that energy can't be created or destroyed. So I do think we go on in some way, even if that's just like our literal physical like cells. And I don't know if consciousness does. And I think it's a mystery. And I don't know because I've never died.
Yeah. How do you feel about reincarnation? Things like
So that's kind of one of the things that like I don't personally believe in, not at least in the way of like your soul leaves your body and then goes into like another body, because I don't really think that the body and the soul can be separated. I'm kind of a non-dualist in that way.
Okay, yeah.
But I do think that like memories and feelings and energy are attached to our physical bodies. Like trauma lives in the DNA. Memories live in not just the brain. The heart produces more electricity than the brain. Like there's so much happening in this body that when a person dies and that energy goes wherever it goes, I think that it gets put back into like the flow of the universe in some way, whether that's like just, you know, becoming a part of a tree or, you know, going back to stardust. Just like the way that the physical body gets like reintroduced into like the cycle of nature. I think that maybe some memories or feelings or experiences could live on in that way, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like, if I have like a memory of a past life, I'm like, well, maybe like a cell from someone else's body is like in mine now. And like, that's where that memory came from.
Fun to think about.
Yes.
I like that.
And my mind could change in like a year. I could have a completely different idea of what I believe.
Oh,
but that's what I believe right now.
This is, and that's the point, right? Like, we're just figuring it
I
out.
love that.
So it sounds like you don't believe in heaven or hell or like life after death. I wonder, how does that impact your work?
Yeah, so that's interesting because as a chaplain, I usually don't disclose my personal beliefs to someone, like unless they ask specifically, and I think it would meet their spiritual needs to know, like if they need reassurance or something like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're asking to like quiz me, and I'm like, no.
Not gonna play that game.
No.
How does that plays out? Like, what does that look like?
Oh, it's fun.
What are the questions? What do you say?
So if someone's like, do you believe in Jesus? Then I'll say, what would it mean to you if I did?
Oh.
And then I can like assess what they need based on the question that they asked. So that's one. Or if they're like, well, what kind of chaplain are you? Then I might say, well, what kind of chaplain do you need? And so it's kind of like being a lawyer. You like answer a question with a question.
Yeah, I'll be whatever you need.
Yeah, pretty much.
I can do my job.
Yeah. That's the point.
I am a mirror ball. But yeah, so because I don't usually disclose that unless, again, it would be like spiritually beneficial for the person, it doesn't actually come up that much. And chaplaincy is kind of weird because you like suspend belief or disbelief when you're working with the person. At least I do. I really learned this when I was working in the inpatient psychiatric unit in my fellowship. and I would provide spiritual care to people with schizophrenia. And basically what I learned is it doesn't matter if something is like actually true, is if it's happening for someone and if they believe that it's happening. Like helping them connect to their feelings and cope with the pain of their experience or the hope that they're experiencing based on a belief, that's what matters. So if I'm working with a patient who believes that they're going to go to heaven, that they're going to see Jesus, that they're going to see their grandma, like whatever, I'm like, yeah, yes, you are. Like, let's talk about it. What are you going to say to Jesus when you see him? What are you most excited for? How's it going to feel to see your grandma again? Like, I help them cope by exploring what they believe. And if someone's like, I'm going to be reincarnated and I'm going to be a butterfly, I'll be like, great. I will look for you.
Yeah.
What do you love about butterflies? That kind of thing, where my belief doesn't really even matter that much at the end of the day. Like, I have to know what it is to stay grounded.
It helps us cope with our own experiences through being a chaplain more than it comes into our work with others.
Well said. Yeah. Because you do have to know what you believe a little bit at least.
Yeah.
Otherwise, then you can't cope with seeing death every day. But yeah, at a certain point, it's not really about what's like quote unquote true. It's about what's helping the person cope. And
Right.
I actually kind of think all spirituality is like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like sometimes what's true is not helpful, you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like, yeah, like that's so fair that it's like, yeah, what's helpful is more important than what's truth.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Lots of different ways to define that.
And like, I don't know if because of wherever the stars were when I was born, that's why I'm so sensitive. I'm a Pisces. But I choose to believe that because it makes me happy and it makes me feel understood and it makes me feel connected to the stars. And so it's true for me, even though it can't be proven.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay. Are there any Taylor Swift songs that helped you cope with death?
Oh, yes. Well, I know I mentioned earlier that sometimes I want to listen to like a really happy song just to kind of like help me release and not to like distract, but just to like help me get some distance.
Yeah.
But sometimes I need to listen to a sad song. And I have a story about that. So the song Epiphany really means a lot to me. And it's about the trauma of being a soldier and the trauma of being a healthcare worker in the pandemic. And it really hits home for me because I was a chaplain at a veterans hospital during the pandemic. So I saw both sides of that. And every time I listen to that song, it brings tears to my eyes because it speaks to how brutal and lonely death can be for the people who are left behind. So there was one night I was working a shift at the hospital where Megan and I met, and a person came in through the emergency room, and without giving away anything personal about them, they basically could have been me. I'll just leave it at that. And they died. And it was the middle of the night. I was the only chaplain in the hospital. And I knew my job was to talk to their family. And not to like tell them that their loved one had died, but to like talk to them after that they had talk to them after they had talked to the doctor. And in this particular instance, no family had come in with this person, so I had to make phone calls. So I like checked with the doctor to make sure that she'd made her necessary phone calls. And then I called this person's mom, and then I called their fiance. The worst part was talking to the fiance. I spent over an hour on the phone with them, and it just like totally crushed me.
Yeah.
Like I was shaking. I felt like I was going to throw up or pass out. Like I was really going through it. And I had never had an experience like that as a chaplain. Like I'm usually pretty good in a crisis, like pretty grounded. And I was like struggling to not dissociate. But I did it. And after the phone call, like it was almost time for my shift to be over. And so I sat down and I journaled about what I was like feeling and thinking and needing to just like get to the bottom of how I was feeling. And I realized that I needed to cry. But the feeling was too big to just go there alone. Like I needed someone to guide me to the tears. And I chose Taylor. I listened to Epiphany because I knew it would make me cry. And I cried about how heartbroken I was and how helpless and shitty I felt and how final death is.
Yeah.
And I got to grieve. And I didn't once wonder if the person who died was going to hell. I only grieved about how much they would be missed and how short their life was. And I wasn't worried about what happened after they died. I just felt shattered that they did. And there were so many lines in that song that stuck out to me that night. Like, I did basically only have 20 minutes to sleep. Like, my shift was almost over, and I was like, I just want to close my eyes for 20 minutes. And she also says, like, there's some things you just can't speak about.
Yeah.
And it's almost like she's saying, I know you can't speak about it. I know it hurts too bad. It hurts too bad to talk about being a veteran. It hurts too bad to talk about being a healthcare worker, to see somebody die. But it's like she's saying, I know you can't talk about it, but I will talk about it for you so that you can feel like a human, so that you can feel less alone. And she literally gave me a glimpse of relief to make some sense of what I'd seen. So it's just very special to me. And every time I listen to that song, it just like reminds me of that gift that she gave me, that she'll never know, that she helped me get through like the hardest shift of my life.
Yeah. Ugh, I want to cry.
So hard. Yeah. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't even have words after that.
Yeah. I don't know how you made it through saying all of that.
Yeah, it's really hard, and obviously a lot of our chaplaincy training is focused on what do you do when things do hit so close to home. And I mean, sometimes it's really obvious why things are hitting close to home. Like, if you just, this person could have been you, you know, you feel a lot of feelings about that. And then other times it's a little easier to carry and process, but sometimes it just gets you.
Yep. My supervisor at my current job, whenever I have something tough and I call her to talk to her about it, like her question is always, how are you going to take care of yourself after this? And that's just such an important part of being a chaplain, is like knowing how to take care of yourself, because it's really heavy.
Yeah. And just grief in general too. I'm like, that's what I tell people who are experiencing something really difficult in the hospital or on hospice, their person's dying or just going through a hard time. It's like, you also need to take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question for patients and family members too. Like, how are you going to take care of yourself after this?
Yeah.
Yeah, or staff. I ask that of staff a lot too.
Me too. Yeah.
Like, what are you going to get yourself after your shift?
What flavor milkshake are you getting after work?
Yeah. I was going to ask, like, how do you guys typically take care of yourself after just hard days like that?
I mean, Taylor Swift is one of the resources.
For sure. Yeah, listening to Taylor. I'm a big talk to other people about it. So
Yeah.
I will call one of my chaplain friends or talk to someone else on staff about it. Because it is hard to understand unless you know.
Yeah. Isn't that how you guys met?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is, now we're bringing it back full circle.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. We met the day after this
Wow.
time of you crying to Epiphany.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like the morning after, but it was the next day. So I had like one day to like process. But so at the time I was working night shifts at the hospital, and Megan came in to work like day shift on the weekend. So it was just the two of us. So normally like during the weekdays, the handoff time is a meeting with like all the day chaplains, but on the weekends it's kind of special because it's just the two chaplains like handing off. So Megan got there and I'm like, hey, I don't know you.
Yeah, we'd never met before.
We'd never met before. And we like just got to chatting, and then you kind of like asked, you had like seen it on the handoff report from like the day before or something. You're like, oh, I saw that one death. Like, are you okay? Or like, how are you doing? Or something like that. And I was just like, oh, I'm okay. I listened to Taylor Swift and cried, and I felt a lot better.
And I was like, no fucking way.
Rewind.
Which also the other big thing for me, there wasn't a lot of chaplains who are my age who I'd like interacted with. I just hadn't been in the same circles apparently in our city. And so it was so cool. And then we're like a few months apart. Like we literally are the same age.
We are the same age. And we did our chaplaincy training with the same people, just at different times.
Just at different times, yeah.
And yeah, had like all of these like really synchronistic things in common. Like we're both married with no kids, got married the same year.
Age, yeah.
What?
We both have brown hair and green eyes.
Yeah.
There's just like all of these little things. And anyway, like you were like, Taylor Swift. I have a Taylor Swift podcast. And I was like, I'll be on it. And here we are.
Yeah, and here we are. And I will just say I've never had an experience of meeting someone and had like such an instant connection of familiarity.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but
Yeah.
it's really awesome.
It is really
and
awesome.
I'm just like, oh yeah, Shannon's in my life now.
Yeah.
I love
We're
that.
good.
I was like, do you want to be friends?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and we like exchanged numbers.
I was like, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you, Taylor, for helping with that moment of connection.
Yeah. And I was like, how did you know that I was a Swiftie? Like, what about me gave it away?
It was the sweater you were wearing.
I know.
It wasn't even like a Taylor Swift sweater. It just looked like something.
It was a cardigan.
It was a cardigan. Well, yeah.
I forget if I asked you that in the moment or...
Yeah, you were like, how did you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, your sweater.
Yeah.
So great.
So good.
Yeah. And that's how we became friends.
And that's how we became friends. And then you were just on my podcast. It was so great.
And we're just in each other's lives now.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Pretty amazing.
So, moral of the story, if you meet someone and you want to be friends, just ask.
Yeah. Just go for it.
Yep.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much for being on the
Yes.
podcast.
This is so good.
I'm just so thankful for you as a person and that you're also willing to do this because I think people are going to learn a lot from you and what we've talked about. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been really fun, and it's also just like helpful for me to talk about why I'm a chaplain, like what I believe, what words mean to me. So this has been really great.
And to have a affirming space of, yes, Taylor Swift is part of my spirituality.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Megan, for having me on here. It's been
Of course.
joy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok. If you want to be a guest on one of our future episodes, you can email us at swiftuality.podcast@gmail.com
Whoop whoop.
or message us somewhere, anywhere.
Yeah.
That's
anywhere.
great.
We'll see them.
Yeah.
Sweet.
All right. Thanks, everyone, so much for listening.
Catch y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.